Alex Carter, a billionaire with everything except love, decides to escape his world by posing as a taxi driver. One stormy night, a mysterious woman, Sophia, enters his cab, carrying secrets darker than the night itself. What starts as a simple ride soon becomes a passionate, life-altering love story. The Weight of a Golden Cage. The world saw Alexander Alex Kingston as a ruthless billionaire, a man who had everything: power, wealth, and women who threw themselves at him. But what they didn't see was the loneliness that came with it. Sitting in his glass-walled penthouse, Alex swirled the whiskey in his hand, staring at the glittering skyline of New York City, the city that worshipped him, the empire he had built. And yet, tonight, none of it felt real. His life had become predictable: lavish parties, business meetings, and shallow conversations with women who cared more about his last name than his heart. "You're drowning, Alex," his best friend Liam Carter chuckled as he leaned back on the couch. "You have everything, yet you look like a man starving for something real." Alex exhaled sharply. "Maybe because I am," Liam smirked, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "Then why don't you try something crazy? Step out of your golden cage. Experience the real world, just for a few days." Alex raised an eyebrow. "And how do you propose I do that?" Liam tossed him a set of keys. "My taxi. Drive around the city. No one will recognize you in a cap and hoodie. Live like an ordinary guy for once." At first, Alex laughed at the absurdity of the idea. Him? A billionaire CEO driving a taxi? But the more he thought about it, the more it intrigued him. Maybe, just maybe, he could escape the expectations, the fake smiles, and see the world through a different lens. That night, he made up his mind. A passenger who changed everything. Dressed in ripped jeans, a simple hoodie, and a worn-out baseball cap, Alex slid into the driver's seat of the taxi. The steering wheel felt foreign in his hands, but there was an odd thrill in the unfamiliarity. For once, he wasn't Alexander Kingston, the billionaire. He was just Alex, the taxi driver. Hours passed as he picked up different passengers. Some were loud and obnoxious, others lost in their own worlds. He listened, observed, but nothing really caught his attention, until she stepped into his taxi. The door creaked open and Sophia Hayes slid into the back seat. The moment Alex glanced at her through the rearview mirror, his breath hitched. She wasn't just beautiful, she was breathtaking. Long chestnut brown hair cascaded over her shoulders, and her emerald green eyes held a depth he couldn't look away from. There was something ethereal about her, a quiet sadness that tugged at him. She wasn't like the women he was used to, dressed in designer labels with rehearsed smiles. No, she was different. "Where to?" he asked, trying to keep his voice casual. Sophia hesitated before murmuring an address in Brooklyn. Her voice was soft, yet laced with exhaustion. As Alex pulled onto the road, silence filled the car. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that made you wonder about the story behind it. Through the mirror, he stole glances at her. She was staring out the window, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her coat. A nervous habit, he guessed. "Long day?" he finally asked. Sophia blinked, seemingly pulled from her thoughts. She let out a small sigh. "You could say that." Her voice held something unspoken, something heavy. "Work?" he probed. She hesitated before nodding. "Yeah, work." Alex noticed the way she gripped her bag tighter, as if guarding a secret. He knew that look. He had seen it in the mirror too many times, the look of someone carrying a burden alone. For reasons he couldn't explain, he wanted to know more about her. Before he could ask, she turned the question back on him. "What about you?" she asked, her gaze meeting his in the mirror. "Do you like being a taxi driver?" The question caught him off guard. He could have laughed at the irony, but instead he played along. "It's different," he admitted. "You meet all kinds of people. Some are in a hurry, some don't even look up from their phones. And then there are some who make you wonder about their story." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "And Which one am I? Alex held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary. The one I'm curious about. Sophia's smile faltered slightly, as if she wasn't used to people wanting to know her story. The air in the taxi shifted. Something unspoken lingered between them. A tension that wasn't uncomfortable, but rather intoxicating. A ride that felt like forever. As they drove through the quiet streets of Brooklyn, the conversation between them became effortless. Sophia talked about little things, how she loved the rain but hated thunderstorms, how she used to sing as a child but stopped because life got too serious. But there was always something she wasn't saying, something hidden behind the pauses in her sentences. Alex didn't push. Instead, he found himself mesmerized by her. The way she bit her lip when she was lost in thought. The way her voice softened when she spoke about her younger brother. And for the first time in a long time, Alex felt something he had never felt before. An undeniable pull towards someone he barely knew. By the time they reached her destination, he didn't want the ride to end. Sophia reached into her bag and pulled out a few crumpled bills. "Keep it," Alex said without thinking. She frowned. "Number, you earned it." "I insist." She shook her head, pressing the money into his hand. "I don't take favors." Her words made something tighten in his chest. She wasn't just beautiful. She was proud, strong, independent. Alex watched as she stepped out of the taxi, disappearing into the dimly lit street. And for the first time in his life, he felt like a man who wanted to chase something real. What he didn't know was that this one ride was just the beginning of a love story that would change both their lives forever. An unforgettable passenger. It had only been a few days since Alexander Kingston, a billionaire masquerading as a taxi driver, met Sophia Hayes, but something about her lingered in his mind. She wasn't like the women in his usual world of extravagant galas and high-end restaurants. Sophia had a quiet strength, an undeniable depth in her green eyes, and an aura that drew him in like a moth to a flame. Most people he met wore masks, but with Sophia, it wasn't just what she said that intrigued him. It was what she didn't say. The hesitations in her words, the way she gripped her bag as if holding on to something fragile, the sadness behind her forced smile. For the first time in his life, Alex wanted to understand someone beyond the surface. So, when she unexpectedly hailed his taxi again the following evening, his heart did something strange. It skipped a beat. A ride full of silent longing. As soon as Sophia slid into the back seat, the air inside the taxi felt charged. Alex gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, forcing himself to remain composed. "You again?" he said, flashing a small smirk through the rearview mirror. Sophia's lips curved into a faint smile. "Guess I have a thing for taxis." Alex chuckled. "Or maybe just for this one." Her gaze met his in the mirror, and for a moment, it felt like the world outside the taxi blurred into nothingness. She was wearing a simple navy blue coat, her chestnut brown hair slightly tousled from the wind, but she looked effortlessly beautiful. There was something delicate about her, yet at the same time, something fiercely unbreakable. Alex cleared his throat, breaking the moment before his thoughts wandered too far. "Rough day?" Sophia let out a tired sigh. "Like every other." He noticed the exhaustion in her voice, the way her shoulders sagged slightly, and for reasons he couldn't explain, his heart clenched. "What do you do?" he asked, keeping his tone light. She hesitated before answering. "I work at a small cafe downtown." He frowned slightly. He had seen her address before. A poor neighborhood in Brooklyn. A cafe job wouldn't be enough to afford even basic living expenses. "Just a cafe?" he probed. Sophia's jaw tightened. "And a few other places." That confirmed his suspicion. She was overworking herself. "Must be tough," he said softly. Sophia exhaled, staring out the window. "You get used to it." There it was again, the sadness, the weight of unspoken pain. Alex wanted to ask more, to dig deeper, but he knew better than to push. Instead, he let the comfortable silence settle between them, his thoughts swirling with curiosity. Why was a woman like her, smart, independent, and undeniably strong, struggling? The most beautiful sound he had ever heard. Halfway through the ride, Alex turned on the radio, hoping to lighten the mood. A soft, nostalgic tune filled the car. An old love song, the kind that tugged at your heartstrings. To his surprise, Sophia hummed along, her fingers lightly tapping against her knee. Alex raised an eyebrow. "You know this song?" A small smile played on her lips. "It's one of my favorites." The way she said it, the warmth in her voice, made something stir inside him. "You have a nice voice," he murmured. Sophia's cheeks flushed slightly and she looked away. "I used to sing a long time ago." Alex tilted his head, intrigued. "Why'd you stop?" She hesitated, her fingers tightening in her lap. "Because life happened." The simplicity of her answer carried an ocean of unspoken emotions. Alex didn't press, but in that moment he found himself wondering, what had life taken from her? And why did he suddenly want to give it back? The gentle intimacy of small gestures. They reached Sophia's neighborhood, and as she reached into her bag for cash, Alex turned slightly in his seat. "Don't worry about it," he said casually. Sophia froze. Her green eyes narrowed slightly. "What do you mean?" Alex shrugged. "This one's on me." Her lips parted in surprise before her expression hardened. "I don't take favors." He wasn't expecting that. "It's not a favor," he said quickly, "just no." Her voice was firm, but there was no anger, just quiet pride. "I pay my own way." Alex studied her, a strange sense of admiration filling his chest. She wasn't just independent, she was fiercely so. Silently, she handed him the cash, their fingers brushing for the briefest moment. A jolt of warmth shot through Alex's skin at the contact. It was nothing, a mere touch, but it left a lingering heat between them. Sophia cleared her throat, quickly pulling her hand away. "Thanks for the ride." Before he could respond, she slipped out of the taxi and disappeared down the dimly lit street. Alex exhaled, gripping the steering wheel, his heart hammering in a way that felt unfamiliar. This wasn't supposed to happen. He wasn't supposed to feel anything. But as he watched her disappear into the night, one thought settled deep in his chest. He wanted to see her again. A desire he couldn't ignore. For the next few days, Alex found himself looking for Sophia, hoping, waiting for her to step into his taxi again. He didn't understand it. He had never chased after a woman before, but Sophia Hayes wasn't just any woman. There was something about her, something raw, something unbreakable, something so heartbreakingly real that drew him in deeper than he had ever fallen before. And for the first time in his life, Alexander Kingston, the billionaire who had everything, found himself wanting something money could never buy. Not status, not luxury, but her. Her smile, her laughter, her trust, and maybe, just maybe, her love. The unexpected meeting. It had been almost a week since Alex last saw Sophia. He told himself it was ridiculous to keep thinking about her, that she was just a passenger, a fleeting moment in his double life. And yet, every night, as he drove through the city, his eyes instinctively searched for her. Then, one evening, as the rain poured heavily over New York, fate intervened. She was standing near the cafe she had mentioned before, shivering under a broken streetlight, holding her coat tightly around her. Her hair was slightly damp from the drizzle, and she looked utterly exhausted. Alex didn't think twice. He pulled over, rolling down the window. "Need a ride?" Sophia turned, startled. The moment she recognized him, something flashed across her face. Surprise, relief, and something else. Something she tried to hide. For a second she hesitated, then sighed and nodded. "Yeah. Thanks." She slid into the passenger seat this time, her body still tense from the cold. "Rough day?" Alex asked, his voice gentle. Sophia exhaled, leaning her head back against the seat. "You could say that." Alex glanced at her, noticing the dark circles beneath her eyes. "You look like you haven't slept in days." She let out a tired chuckle. "That's because I haven't." His grip on the steering wheel tightened. He didn't like seeing her like this. He didn't like the idea of her struggling, pushing herself to the point of exhaustion. "You shouldn't push yourself so hard," he said quietly. Sophia turned her head toward him, her green eyes piercing. "And what choice do I have?" Her words hit him like a punch to the chest. She wasn't saying them to gain pity, she was simply stating her reality. Alex swallowed, struggling to find the right words. Instead, he reached over and turned on the heater, adjusting it toward her. Sophia's eyes widened slightly at the small gesture. It was such a simple thing, but the warmth that filled the car wasn't just from the heater, it was from him. She didn't say anything, but as she tucked her hands into her lap, something about her expression softened. A rainy night and a shared moment. The rain continued to pour as Alex drove, the rhythmic sound of droplets tapping against the windshield filling the silence. "Where to?" he finally asked. Sophia hesitated. "I don't want to go home yet." Alex raised an eyebrow. "So, where do you want to go?" She glanced out the window as if searching for an answer. Then, almost shyly, she murmured, "Anywhere quiet." For some reason, those two words sent warmth through Alex's chest. He didn't know what she was running from, but he wanted to give her an escape, even if just for a little while. Without another word, he turned onto a different road, away from the city, toward the quieter streets near the waterfront. After a few minutes, he parked near the edge of the pier, where the city lights shimmered over the dark water. The rain had slowed to a drizzle and the world outside felt strangely peaceful. Sophia looked around, her expression softening. "It's beautiful here." Alex leaned back in his seat, watching her. "Yeah, it is." For the first time since she stepped into the car, Sophia seemed to relax. She let out a small sigh and closed her eyes for a moment, as if savouring the quiet. Alex didn't rush her. He simply watched, mesmerised by how the soft glow of the streetlight reflected in her damp hair, by the way her lips parted slightly as she breathed. She was beautiful. Not in the way supermodels were. Not in the way women in his world tried to be. She was beautiful in a way that was real. And for the first time, he felt something deep inside him shift. A glimpse of the past. After a while, Sophia let out a small laugh. "You're a strange taxi driver, you know that?" Alex smirked. "Why? Because I don't drive straight home?" "Because you listen," she said softly, turning to look at him. "Most people don't." Her words hit deeper than she probably intended. Alex had spent his entire life surrounded by people who talked, but never truly listened. Yet, here he was, sitting in a taxi, wanting nothing more than to hear every single thing she had to say. Sophia sighed and glanced out at the water. "I used to come to places like this when I was younger, before everything changed." Alex tilted his head. "What happened?" She hesitated. Then, in a voice so quiet it was almost lost in the rain, she whispered, "Life." The weight in her words was enough to make Alex's chest tighten. For a moment, he wanted to tell her the truth, that he wasn't really a taxi driver, that he wasn't just some random guy picking up passengers, but something held him back. Would she see him differently if she knew? Would she push him away? So instead of revealing who he really was, he simply said, "Tell me about it." Sophia turned toward him, her eyes searching his. And then, she did. A confession under the stars. She told him about the life she lost, how she once had dreams, big dreams, of singing, of making music, of becoming something more. How she had been on the edge of success once, but then tragedy struck. How she lost her family, her home, and everything she had ever known. Alex listened, every word sinking deep into his bones. He had always thought money was the greatest power in the world. But sitting here listening to Sophia, he realized that life had the power to take everything from you in an instant. And it had taken so much from her. When she finished speaking, there was a heavy silence between them. Then, finally, Alex whispered, "I'm sorry." Sophia let out a soft, shaky laugh. "You don't have to be. But I am, he said firmly, because you deserved better. She turned to him then, her green eyes glistening with unshed tears, and for the first time she didn't look away. Instead, she let him in. The unspoken attraction. The space between them felt smaller. Alex had never felt this way before, never had the urge to reach out, to touch someone just to make sure they were real. But with Sophia, the pull was undeniable. His fingers twitched against the gear shift, resisting the instinct to reach for her. Sophia must have felt it too because she suddenly turned away, exhaling shakily. We should go. Alex swallowed, forcing himself to nod. Yeah. But as he started the engine and began driving back toward the city, one thought wouldn't leave his mind. He was falling for her, and if he wasn't careful, he might not be able to stop. An unspoken longing. For the next few days, Sophia occupied every corner of Alex's mind. It didn't matter where he was. At his corporate office, discussing multi-million-dollar deals, or behind the wheel of his taxi, driving through the city, he thought of her. Her laugh. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. The way her eyes held an ocean of unspoken pain. He told himself it was dangerous to get too close, that if she found out who he really was, she'd never look at him the same way again. But no matter how much he tried to fight it, he couldn't stay away. That's why, one evening, he found himself outside the small restaurant where she worked. Through the glass window, he saw her moving between tables, taking orders with a tired but genuine smile. She was different here, more guarded, more careful. She laughed when customers spoke to her, but it never reached her eyes. Alex clenched his jaw. He hated seeing her like this, working herself to exhaustion just to survive. Then, as if sensing his gaze, Sophia turned toward the window. Their eyes met. For a second, her expression froze in surprise. Then, slowly, she smiled. Alex's breath caught in his throat. God, that smile. He hadn't even realized how much he needed to see it until that moment. Sophia gestured for him to wait, and within a few minutes she stepped outside, wrapping her coat tightly around her. "What are you doing here?" she asked, tilting her head. Alex shrugged, shoving his hands into his pockets. "Just in the neighborhood." She raised an eyebrow. "You expect me to believe that?" He smirked. "Maybe." Sophia let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. "You're terrible at lying." Alex knew she was right, but he didn't care, because standing here with her, under the city lights, nothing else mattered. A walk under the city lights. The night was crisp and cool, the streets alive with the hum of distant traffic. Sophia hugged herself against the chill. Without thinking, Alex took off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. She looked up at him, startled. "You don't have to. I want to." His voice was soft but firm. Sophia hesitated before pulling the jacket tighter around herself. "Thanks." They walked in silence for a while, their steps slow and unhurried. Then, out of nowhere, she asked, "Why do you do it?" Alex glanced at her. "Do what?" "Drive a taxi," she said, turning to face him. "I don't get it. You're different from other drivers." He knew this question would come eventually, and yet he still didn't have an answer that wouldn't be a lie. So instead he said, "Maybe I just like meeting new people." Sophia studied him for a long moment before shaking her head. "No, it's more than that." Alex tensed. He had never met someone who could see through him like she did. "I think," she continued, her voice quieter, "you're searching for something." His heart slammed against his ribs. He had spent years believing he had everything: money, power, control. But then, Sophia had stepped into his life, and suddenly, none of it seemed enough. Maybe she was right. Maybe he was searching for something, and maybe that something was standing right in front of him. A moment too close. They stopped by the riverside where the city lights flickered over the water. Sophia leaned against the railing, letting out a tired sigh. "Sometimes, I wish I could just escape, even for a little while." Alex turned toward her, his gaze intense. "Then let's escape. She blinked at him. What? Even if it's just for a night, he said softly. Let's forget about everything else. Sophia hesitated, searching his face. And how do you suggest we do that? Alex smirked, by doing something completely ridiculous. Her lips curled into a small smile. Like what? Without thinking, Alex reached for her hand. Dance with me. Sophia's eyes widened. Here. Now. Why not? He whispered. The street was quiet. The distant sound of music played from a nearby cafe. The air between them felt charged, electric. For a moment, Sophia just stared at him. Then she laughed. A real, genuine laugh, and just like that, she placed her hand in his. Alex pulled her closer, their bodies just inches apart. The world faded. There was no city, no problems, no past. Just them. He spun her gently, his hands firm yet careful. Sophia's laughter filled the night, blending with the soft melody in the air. And then she tripped. Alex caught her instantly, their bodies pressing together. The laughter died. They were too close. His arms were wrapped around her waist, her hands clinging to his shoulders. Her lips were slightly parted, her breath warm against his skin. Alex swallowed hard. Everything in him screamed to close the distance, to press his lips against hers, to claim the connection that had been pulling them together since the moment she stepped into his cab. But then Sophia's expression shifted. Her smile faded, replaced by something else. Fear. Not of him, but of what she was feeling. And just like that, she pulled away. I should go, she whispered, stepping back. Alex's chest tightened, but he forced a nod. Okay. Sophia hesitated as if debating something. Then she reached for his jacket and slowly slipped it off, handing it back to him. Keep it, Alex said, his voice hoarse. Sophia met his gaze. Are you sure? He nodded. Yeah. A small, unreadable smile touched her lips. Thanks, Alex. It was the first time she had ever said his name like that, softly, intimately. And as she walked away, disappearing into the night, he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just attraction. This was something deeper, something real. And he wasn't sure if he could ever let her go. An unshakable feeling Alex couldn't get Sophia out of his mind. It had been days since their night by the riverside, since their dance, their almost kiss, since she had looked at him with something dangerously close to longing. And then walked away. But the way she felt in his arms, the way her lips had parted slightly, as if she had wanted the kiss just as much as he did, it haunted him. And the worst part? He didn't know where they stood. She had taken his jacket but left with uncertainty in her eyes. Was she afraid of her own feelings? Or was she trying to protect herself from something? One thing was certain. Alex couldn't let this be the end. That's why, when he pulled up outside the restaurant she worked at later that evening, he knew he wouldn't leave until he saw her. Sophia stepped out of the building, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. And then she saw him. For a moment she just stood there, frozen. Then, as if gathering herself, she walked toward him with slow, hesitant steps. You're here again, she said, her voice unreadable. Alex's heart pounded. I told you. I can't stay away. Sophia inhaled sharply. He could see the flicker of emotions in her eyes, the battle she was fighting within herself. She glanced away. You should. His chest tightened. Why? Because... She hesitated, hugging herself. You don't know me, Alex. I know enough. His voice was steady, but there was an ache behind it. I know you're strong, even when life has been cruel to you. I know you hide your pain behind that beautiful smile. I know you're afraid of letting someone in. Sophia's lips parted slightly, her breath hitching, but Alex wasn't finished. And I also know that when I'm with you, nothing else matters, he murmured, stepping closer. Tell me you don't feel the same way, and I'll walk away right now. Sophia didn't say a word. Instead, she turned and started walking. Alex felt a sharp pang in his chest. So that was it. But just as he was about to turn around, she stopped, and without looking back, she whispered, "Come with me." A night of secrets. Sophia led him through the dimly lit streets, past the busy markets, and into a quieter part of town. Alex didn't ask where they were going, he just followed. Finally, she stopped in front of a small apartment building, the paint chipping off the walls, the lights flickering faintly in the hallway. "This is where I live," she said softly. Alex's throat tightened. It wasn't just the place. It was the weight in her voice, the quiet resignation, the way she had accepted that this was all she deserved. He wanted to tell her that she deserved more, that she deserved everything. But he didn't, because Sophia was opening up to him now, and the last thing he wanted was to scare her away. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. After a moment, she turned to look at him. "You coming?" Alex didn't hesitate. A glimpse into her world. Her apartment was small. The walls were bare except for a few old photographs. The furniture was minimal, a worn-out couch, a tiny table, a shelf stacked with books. It was simple, modest, but it smelled like her, like lavender and something sweetly familiar. Sophia set her bag down and turned to face him, suddenly looking vulnerable in a way he had never seen before. "This is me, Alex," she said quietly. "This is my life." He could hear the unspoken words beneath her voice. "Do you still want to be here?" His heart clenched. Instead of answering, he took a step forward, his gaze never leaving hers. And then, he did something unexpected. He reached out and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Sophia froze. Her breath caught. "Your life is beautiful," he murmured. Her eyes widened, as if she hadn't expected those words, as if no one had ever told her that before. Then, before she could react, Alex's fingers brushed over a small, delicate scar on her temple. Sophia immediately stiffened. She stepped back, turning her face away. Alex's brows furrowed. "Sophia," she shook her head. "It's nothing." But he could see the pain flickering in her eyes. He could see the way she had built walls around herself, walls that no one had dared to break down before. "I don't believe that," Alex said gently. Sophia swallowed hard, hugging herself. For a long moment she said nothing. Then, in a voice so quiet he almost didn't hear it, she whispered, "My past isn't something I talk about." Alex's heart twisted. There was something there, something she wasn't saying, something that haunted her. He wanted to ask, wanted to know everything about her, but he also knew she wasn't ready. So instead he whispered, "Whenever you're ready, I'll be here." Sophia's gaze snapped to his, and for the first time since they had met, she looked at him with something raw, something real, something dangerously close to hope, a moment too intimate. The tension in the room grew thick, heavy. Sophia looked away, biting her lip. "You should go, Alex." His jaw tightened. He knew she was fighting something inside her, but instead of pushing her, he took a slow step back. "Okay," he said softly. But just as he reached the door, her voice stopped him. "Wait." Alex turned. And then, Sophia took a deep breath and walked toward him, slowly, carefully. And before he could think, before he could question anything, she reached for his hand. Her fingers curled around his, warm and trembling. Alex felt his pulse quicken. "Sophia." She looked up at him, her eyes shining with something fragile, something desperate. And then, she did the one thing he hadn't expected. She leaned in. Alex forgot how to breathe. Her lips hovered just inches from his, her breath mingling with his own. His hands moved instinctively, one settling on the small of her back, the other gently cupping her cheek. He could feel her hesitation, but he could also feel her longing. And so he whispered, "Are you sure?" Sophia's breath hitched. Then, after a heartbeat of silence, she nodded, and just like that, their lips met. It was slow, hesitant at first, a whisper of a kiss. But then, something shifted, Sophia's fingers tightened around his shirt, pulling him closer. And Alex melted. He deepened the kiss, his arms wrapping around her, holding her as if she was the only thing that mattered in the world. Because in that moment, she was. It wasn't just a kiss. It was everything they had been holding back. And as the night wrapped around them, Alex knew one thing for certain. There was no turning back now. A morning unlike any other Sophia stirred awake, feeling the warmth of sunlight on her face. For a moment she remained still, eyes closed, as if savouring something fragile. Something new. And then she remembered. The night before. Alex. The way he had held her. The way his lips had claimed hers with a tenderness that unravelled everything she had been trying so hard to hide. A shiver ran through her, not from fear, but from something far more dangerous. She had let herself feel. She had let herself fall. And now, as her eyes fluttered open, her heart clenched at the sight before her. Alex sat across the room, perched on her old couch, watching her. His gaze was unreadable, his expression softer than she had ever seen before. Sophia's breath caught. "You stayed." His lips twitched into a smile. "I didn't want to leave you alone." Her heart twisted painfully. She had spent so much of her life alone, but now there was this man, this kind, frustrating, beautiful man, who kept showing up, kept seeing her in ways no one ever had. And that terrified her. She sat up, hugging the blanket to her chest. "Last night," she started, her voice uncertain. Alex leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "Was real." Sophia swallowed. Was it? Or had it been a mistake? She opened her mouth, ready to say something, anything to put distance between them. But before she could, Alex stood and slowly walked toward her. His movements were slow, deliberate, as if he knew she might run if he got too close. When he reached her, he knelt down in front of her, resting his hands on the edge of the bed. Sophia forgot how to breathe. "I know you're scared," he murmured. Her fingers tightened around the blanket. "I know you want to push me away," he continued, his voice gentle but firm. She did. Because the more she let herself feel for him, the more she risked losing everything. But then, Alex did something that shattered every wall she had built. He cupped her face. His thumb traced the soft curve of her cheek, his touch so delicate, so reverent, that tears burned at the back of her eyes. "I don't care what's in your past, Sophia," he whispered. "I just want to be in your present." Something inside her cracked, and before she could stop herself, she whispered, "You shouldn't." Alex's jaw clenched. "Why?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Sophia turned her face away. "Because the moment you learn the truth, you'll regret it." A past that refuses to stay buried. The weight of her words hung between them like an unspoken storm. Alex didn't push, but Sophia saw the flicker of frustration in his eyes. And the worst part? He wasn't frustrated with her. He was frustrated with whatever had hurt her so deeply. "I need to go," she said quickly, standing up and pulling away from him. Alex exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "All right," he said, though the way he looked at her told her he wasn't done. He was giving her space, for now. But Sophia knew. He wasn't letting go. Later that day, Sophia stood outside the cafe where she worked, staring at the ground, lost in thought. She had spent so long trying to survive, so long pretending she didn't need anyone. But Alex was proving to be a temptation she couldn't resist. And that was dangerous, because Sophia had secrets. And if he ever found out, she shivered. Just then, a shadow fell over her. Sophia stiffened. That scent, musky, sharp, familiar, unwelcome. A voice followed. "You look good, Sophia." Her stomach turned to ice. Number not him. Slowly, she lifted her gaze, and there he was. Nathan, the man she had spent years trying to escape. A cruel smile tugged at his lips. "Did you miss me, darling?" Sophia's world spun. A heart in danger. Alex could tell something was wrong the second he saw her. She was standing by the cafe, pale, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. And then he saw him. A man. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Too close. Alex's body went rigid. Without thinking, he moved. He reached them just as the man grabbed Sophia's wrist. "Let go of her." Nathan turned lazily, his dark eyes assessing Alex. A smirk played on his lips. "And who the hell are you?" Alex's jaw locked. He didn't answer. Instead, he looked at Sophia. She was shaking. And that's when Alex knew. Whoever this man was, he wasn't just someone from her past. He was the reason she was afraid to love. Nathan chuckled. "Ah, I see. You must be the new idiot she's playing with." Sophia flinched. And that was it. Alex grabbed him by the collar. "Say one more word and I swear." Nathan's smirk widened. "Protective, aren't we?" He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You have no idea what she is, do you?" Alex's heart pounded. Nathan pulled back and dusted off his jacket. Then, with one last glance at Sophia, he murmured, "You can't run forever, sweetheart." And then, he was gone, leaving Sophia shaken, leaving Alex furious, leaving behind questions that burned. Alex turned to her, his voice softer now. "Sophia? Who was that?" She looked away. Tears glistened in her eyes, but when she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "My past," she said, "and now it's found me." Alex felt his entire chest tighten. He reached for her hands, gripping them firmly. "You're not alone," he whispered. Sophia's breath hitched. For a moment, she looked like she wanted to believe him, like she wanted to trust him. But then, she stepped back. "I can't do this, Alex," she choked out. "I can't drag you into this." And before he could stop her, she ran, leaving Alex standing there, heart racing, determined, and more than ever, knowing one thing for certain. He wasn't going to lose her. A love that feels like goodbye. The rain had started falling lightly by the time Alex reached Sophia's apartment. She was inside. He knew it. He could see the faint glow of the lamp through the window, the shadow of her pacing figure moving restlessly. She was hiding from him. But after what happened today, after the way she had run, Alex wasn't going to let her hide anymore. His fists clenched as he knocked firmly on the door. Silence. He knocked again. Sophia opened the door. His voice was controlled, but inside he was burning. Still no answer. His chest tightened. Was she crying? Was she scared? Or worse? Was she trying to leave? The thought alone made panic surge through him. He reached for the doorknob, testing it. Unlocked. Taking a deep breath, he pushed it open. And there she was, standing by the window, her arms wrapped around herself, as if trying to hold herself together. When she turned, her eyes, those deep, wounded eyes, held so much pain that it nearly broke him. Alex stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, finally, Sophia let out a shaky breath. "You shouldn't be here." Alex's jaw clenched. "Why not?" She looked away. "Because I don't want to hurt you." He took a step closer. "The only thing that's hurting me, Sophia, is not knowing the truth." Her body tensed. "Sophia." His voice was raw, desperate. Tell me what you're running from." For a moment she didn't move. Then her shoulders slumped, as if she had lost the strength to keep fighting. And when she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. The past that haunts her. "His name is Nathan Carter," she murmured. Alex's chest tightened. "The man from earlier." She nodded, her fingers trembling as she hugged herself tighter. "I met him years ago," she said, "back when I was still naive enough to believe in fairy tales." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "He was charming, confident. He made me feel safe." Alex stayed silent, letting her speak at her own pace. "I was young, desperate for love, and he knew exactly how to break me." She swallowed hard as if the memories were poison in her mouth. He lied. About everything. about who he was, what he wanted. At first, he made me feel like I was his world. But then, the controlling started, the manipulation, the threats. Her voice grew hollow. He made me think I couldn't survive without him. Alex's fingers curled into fists, his body burned with rage. Not at her, never at her, but at the man who had done this to her. I tried to leave, she whispered, but he wouldn't let me go. And when I finally got away, I thought I was free. A single tear slipped down her cheek. But he found me, Alex. He always finds me. A heavy silence filled the room. Alex took a slow, measured breath. That day when I first picked you up in the taxi. Were you running from him? She nodded. That's why you won't let anyone get close to you. His voice was thick with understanding. Sophia's chin trembled, because every time I do, they end up getting hurt. Her eyes met his, full of fear, pain, longing. And then she whispered the words that shattered his heart. I can't let that happen to you, Alex. A love that frightens her. Alex exhaled sharply, stepping forward until he was right in front of her. You don't get to decide that for me, Sophia. Her breath hitched. I don't care how dangerous he is, Alex said, his voice fierce. I don't care what your past looks like. I care about you. Tears welled in her eyes. Alex, I love you, Sophia. Her whole body froze. Alex cupped her face, his thumbs gently brushing away her tears. I don't care how broken you think you are, he murmured, because to me, you're everything. Her lips parted, her breath shallow, but then a sob escaped her, and suddenly she was pushing him away. No, she choked out, shaking her head. You don't understand. Her voice broke. You deserve someone whole, not someone who's spent her life running, not someone who... Alex grabbed her wrists, pulling her to him. You're not running anymore, he whispered. Not alone. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I don't know how to stop, she admitted brokenly. Alex's gaze softened. Then let me be the one to hold you still. A heartbreaking decision. For a moment, she let herself believe him, let herself feel the safety of his arms, the warmth of his love. But deep down, she knew this couldn't last. Nathan wouldn't let her go. And if Alex kept pushing, if he stayed, he would become a target. She couldn't live with that. So, with every ounce of strength she had left, she forced herself to do the one thing that would save him. She lied. I don't love you. The words tore her apart as they left her lips. Alex stilled. His hands loosened around her. For the first time since she had met him, his eyes filled with pain. She turned away, biting her lip to keep from screaming. Leave, Alex, she whispered. For a long moment he didn't move. Then, his voice, raw, low, broke the silence. You can lie to me, Sophia. A pause. But don't lie to yourself. And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving Sophia standing in the dim light, tears streaming down her face, her heart shattering. The love that won't die. Alex didn't know how long he walked through the rain. His heart felt like it had been ripped out, but deep down he knew. This wasn't over. Sophia could push him away. She could build her walls higher, but what they had, what he felt for her, was too real to disappear, and no matter what it took, he was going to save her. Even if she didn't believe she deserved saving, even if it meant facing the devil from her past, because he wasn't letting go. Not now. Not ever. A man who won't give up. Alex sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Sophia's words still echoed in his mind. I don't love you. It was a lie. He had seen it in her eyes, felt it in her touch. The way she trembled when he held her, the way she clung to him for just a second before pushing him away. She was trying to protect him. But from what? From Nathan? Alex's jaw clenched as a surge of anger burned through him. Nathan Carter. A man who thrived on control, on making people feel powerless. But Alex wasn't powerless, and he sure as hell wasn't going to let him win. With a sharp exhale, he grabbed his phone and made a call. "Find me everything on Nathan Carter," he ordered. "I don't care how deep you have to dig. I need every single detail." There was a brief silence. "Understood, sir." Alex ended the call. His chest rose and fell with determination. If Sophia thought she had to fight this battle alone, she was wrong, because she wasn't alone anymore, and he was about to prove it. The trap tightens. Meanwhile, Sophia sat in her dark apartment staring blankly at the floor. She had done it. She had pushed Alex away. So why did it feel like her soul had been ripped apart? Her hands trembled as she pulled her knees to her chest. Nathan was out there, watching, waiting. She had seen the way he had looked at Alex, the same way a predator looks at its next victim. And she couldn't let that happen. She couldn't. A sudden knock at the door made her breath hitch. She froze. Number please, not him. The knocking came again, sharper this time. Sophia. Her stomach dropped. That voice. Nathan. "I know you're in there," he called smoothly. "Open the door, sweetheart." Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might break her ribs. Her fingers shook violently as she reached for her phone, ready to call for help. But then, Nathan's voice turned dark. "You think Alex can save you?" he sneered. "Do you really think a man like him would still want you after he knows what you've done?" Sophia's breath hitched. She gripped her phone tighter. "Because if he sticks around," Nathan continued, "I'll make sure he pays the price." Her blood ran cold, and in that moment, she knew what she had to do. A desperate plea. Alex was pacing his penthouse when his phone rang. His heart nearly stopped when he saw Sophia's name. "Sophia," he breathed, answering immediately. "Are you okay?" A long silence. Then, "Meet me at the pier." Her voice was shaky, weak. "Please, Alex," she whispered. "Come alone." Alex's pulse thundered. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. But if Sophia was reaching out to him after everything, it meant she needed him, and nothing in this world was going to stop him from going to her. The darkest hour. The night air was thick with tension as Alex stepped onto the pier. The water was eerily calm. The only sound was the soft crashing of the waves. And then he saw her. Sophia stood at the edge, her arms wrapped around herself, her eyes full of desperation and pain. Alex moved toward her. "Sophia," he murmured. She flinched. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. Alex's heart twisted. "You asked me to." Her lips quivered. "I was wrong," she said. "You need to leave, Alex." His hands curled into fists. "No," he said firmly. "Not until you tell me what's going on." Sophia shook her head violently. "You don't understand." Then suddenly, a voice from the darkness. "Oh, I think he does." Alex's entire body tensed. He turned, and there he was, Nathan Carter, smirking, confident, dangerous, and flanked by two towering men. Alex's jaw locked. "Nathan," he said coldly. Nathan chuckled, taking slow, deliberate steps toward them. "You really don't know when to quit, do you?" he mused. Most men would have run the moment they heard Sophia's sob story. Alex's hands clenched. Rage burned inside him. But he forced himself to stay calm. "Let her go, Nathan," he said, his voice dangerously low. Nathan tilted his head. "Or what?" Alex stepped closer. "Or you'll regret it," Nathan scoffed. "You really think you can save her?" He turned to Sophia. "Tell him, sweetheart, tell him the truth." Sophia's eyes filled with tears. Nathan smirked. "Tell him that you were mine, that you ran after you." "Enough," Alex growled. His patience was gone. "You don't own her," he spat, "and you never will." Nathan laughed, but it was a cold, cruel sound. "You think love is enough to protect her?" he sneered. "You're nothing, Alex. You're just a man playing hero." Alex smirked. And then he pulled out his phone. "I wouldn't be so sure about that," he said. Nathan frowned. And that's when Alex turned the screen toward him, revealing a live police feed. Nathan's smirk dropped. I did my homework, Nathan, Alex said. I found everything. The extortion, the threats, the stolen money. Nathan's expression darkened. And now, Alex continued, the police are on their way. Nathan's face twisted with rage. You son of a... He lunged, but Alex was faster. With a sharp movement, he dodged, gripping Nathan's collar and slamming him against the railing. You will never hurt her again, Alex growled, his voice deadly. Nathan struggled, but Alex's grip was ironclad. Then, the distant wail of sirens. Nathan's eyes widened, and for the first time, he looked afraid. Alex leaned in, his voice ice-cold. This is over. Nathan stiffened, and then, red and blue lights flooded the pier. The police surrounded them, and within moments, Nathan was dragged away. Sophia stood there shaking as it all sank in. And then, she collapsed into Alex's arms. He held her tight, pressing his lips to her hair. It's over, he whispered. Sophia's breath hitched, and for the first time in years, she let herself believe it. A moment of silence, a heart full of emotions. The sirens faded into the distance, taking Nathan away forever, but Sophia stood frozen, her body trembling against Alex's chest. She had spent so long running, hiding, fearing, and now, for the first time in years, she could finally breathe. But even as the weight of her past lifted, a new fear crept into her heart. What if she had lost Alex forever? What if, after everything, he finally realized she wasn't worth the fight? Slowly she pulled back, her tear-filled eyes meeting his. Alex's gaze was steady, unreadable, and for the first time since she had met him, she couldn't tell what he was thinking. A sharp pain twisted in her chest. Her voice broke. I know I hurt you. Alex's jaw tightened. Sophia, I lied to you, she whispered, cutting him off. I told you I didn't love you because I was scared, because I thought it was the only way to keep you safe. She swallowed hard, forcing the words out before she lost her courage. But the truth is, her voice was barely a whisper now. I love you, Alex. I have since the first time I got into your taxi. A single tear slipped down her cheek. And if you walk away now, I'll understand, she finished brokenly. But I just needed you to know. She braced herself for the pain, for the moment he turned and left, for the sound of her heart shattering all over again. But it never came. Instead, Alex cupped her face, his touch warm and firm. And then, he kissed her. A kiss that changed everything. It wasn't just a kiss. It was everything. A storm of passion, of longing, of all the words they had left unspoken. Sophia gasped against his lips, her hands gripping his jacket like he was the only thing keeping her upright. Alex deepened the kiss, his fingers tangling in her hair, pulling her impossibly closer. The pier, the city, the world around them. All of it disappeared. There was only him, only this moment. By the time they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless. Alex's forehead rested against hers, his hand still cradling her cheek. I love you, Sophia. His voice was hoarse, filled with raw emotion. I've loved you since the first time I saw you standing in the rain. Sophia's breath caught. Alex smiled softly. You're not getting rid of me that easily. A choked laugh escaped her, half sob, half joy. You're impossible, she whispered. Alex grinned. And you're mine. And with that he kissed her again, long, deep, and filled with a love that neither of them would ever doubt again. A love worth fighting. For a week later, Sophia stood in the middle of a lavish penthouse, her eyes wide with disbelief. Alex had brought her here right after everything with Nathan had ended, not as a guest, not as someone who needed protection, but as someone who belonged by his side. This is too much, she murmured, turning to him. Alex leaned casually against the doorway, watching her with a small smile. It's exactly what you deserve, he corrected. Sophia bit her lip. Alex, I don't need. I know, he cut in gently, stepping closer. But I want you to have it. His hands slid around her waist, pulling her flush against him. I want you to have everything, he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. Sophia closed her eyes, her heart swelling with love, not because of the penthouse, not because of the money, but because, for the first time in her life, someone truly saw her. Not as a runaway, not as a woman with a broken past, but simply as Sophia. And she had never felt more loved. A grand gesture. A few nights later, Alex blindfolded Sophia and led her somewhere mysterious. Alex, she laughed, gripping his hand. Where are we going? You'll see, he said, amusement lacing his voice. Finally, they stopped. Ready, he whispered. Sophia nodded. He slowly removed the blindfold, and she gasped. They were standing in front of a small, charming restaurant overlooking the city skyline. The lights twinkled softly, casting a golden glow around them. And above the entrance, her name was written in elegant cursive. Sophia's place. Her hands flew to her mouth. Alex! Her voice trembled. He turned to her, his expression full of love. I know how much cooking means to you, he said softly. I know how much you've always wanted your own place. Tears welled in her eyes. So I bought it, he continued, smiling. And it's yours now. Sophia let out a broken laugh, shaking her head in disbelief. This is real? She whispered. Alex cupped her face, brushing away a stray tear with his thumb. As real as my love for you. A sob escaped her as she threw her arms around his neck, kissing him deeply. He held her close, his lips moving tenderly over hers. This was happiness, and she had finally found it. A future full of love. Months later, Sophia's restaurant was the most talked-about place in the city. She worked every day, pouring her heart into each dish, each meal, each moment. And every night, after the last customer had gone, Alex would be waiting, leaning against the counter with that infuriatingly charming smile. You're staring again, she teased one night. Alex grinned. Can you blame me? My girlfriend's the most beautiful woman in the world. Sophia rolled her eyes. Flattery will get you nowhere. Oh? He stepped closer, his voice dropping. Not even a little kiss, she giggled, pushing against his chest. You're impossible, Alex smirked, and you love me for it. Sophia sighed dramatically. I suppose I do. He lifted her onto the counter, caging her in with his arms. His voice dropped to a husky whisper. Good. And then he kissed her, slow and deep, full of promises of forever. Because that's exactly what they had. A love that had survived the worst. A love that had conquered fear. And most importantly, a love that was only just beginning.